All right, everyone. It's good to see everybody out tonight, even in the rain. I just got the cue from up there that we're now recording, so we got to get started. All right, let me make a few announcements before we get into our study tonight. Next, this coming Saturday is our Shiloh Clays. What's that? Y'all quit waving at the camera. Ain't nobody see y'all wave. The camera's back there, guys. The camera's back there. They're waving at me. Oh, okay. I'm bad. I'm so sorry. I broke the bro code. I understand. All right, so the clay shoot is this Saturday. Hope you've signed up for that. We have a teachers meeting for our Sunday school classes. You should have gotten your text today sometime. I know Miss Penny, you got yours. Just going to discuss going forward. Don't know when we'll be able to move forward. I heard today that yesterday the state reported 962 cases of COVID, the highest day so far in this whole pandemic. And I thought we were going the other way. But the good news is the hospitalizations are going down, and so are deaths. So there's a bright side to that. Community serve is next Wednesday night. So our our first Wednesday community service will be next Wednesday night. And women's Bible study will be starting Monday, right? From 9:30 to 11:30, Miss Kelly will be leading that, and that'll be here. So make those notes for your announcements. And before we get started, I'm going to ask Tim if you would lead us in prayer, please. Amen. Thank you, Tim. Any questions from last week's study? Any at all? If not, tonight we're going to look at the second church of the seven churches of Asia, the church at Smyrna. Church at Smyrna. We're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 2, verses 8 through 11. If you turn there, we got them on the screen if you want to just read along with us. Let's go ahead and read those before we get started. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these things say the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your works, tribulation, and poverty, but you are rich, and I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Now, make a note right here. He doesn't say that, but you are of the synagogue of Satan. That's important, but he said you are a synagogue of Satan. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. Now, let me give you some interesting facts concerning the church at Smyrna. Number one, it was one of the chief cities of the Roman-dominated Asia, and it competed with places such as Pergamos and Ephesus for the title of first city of Asia. Now, that was a pretty big deal back in that time. Smyrna was settled in the 11th century BC. It did not get its height of importance until Alexander the Great laid waste to it and then laid a new foundation for a new city. The name Smyrna means myrrh. Smyrna was known for its schools of science and medicine. Smyrna possessed on the slope of Mount Pagus a theater that could seat up to 20,000 people. Smyrna hosted and celebrated the Olympic Games. On the ground floor of the marketplace called the Agora in Smyrna existed 28 businesses, all of which faced toward the north. The market's second floor contained rows of columns between which galleries existed, and it was kind of like what we'd call a mall today. And as such, the Agora was the largest marketplace in the world at that time. One of the Apostle John's students, Polycarp, according to the second century bishop and historian Arianus, was not only instructed by the apostles that were remaining at that time, but was also appointed by those same apostles bishop of the church in Smyrna, or elder, or what we would call pastor. Now, how many of y'all know the story of Polycarp? Okay. Polycarp was, there's even a Southern gospel song about him. Isn't it, baby? Didn't y'all sing a song about him? Yeah, something like that. He was burned at the stake in AD 155. All right, so the Bible talks about the Jews here in our text. And these Jews, and we'll talk more about them in just a moment, but they were part of the church, but they were anything but from God or of God. And so what they did was they worked with the local government there to try to get Polycarp shut down, try to get him to stop preaching, try to get him done away with. So his friends, the church, they tried to get him to flee. And he wouldn't run. He said, I'm not going to run. And they begged him to at least just get out of town. So he went out of town to a cottage of his. And they found him there. The Grecians came and found him there. He wouldn't flee from them. And they took him in, and they were going to nail him to the stake and burn him. And he told them, no need to nail me. I'm not going to go anywhere. And through a long discourse, he said, do what you're going to do. Well, the historian Arianus tells this, and there's also witnesses to the fact also. But when they set him on fire, the fire came up around him, but did not burn him. And the witnesses there that actually saw this said that his body, that the smell from it was such as baked bread, and his color was such as a brown or a glowing gold color. And he did not die. And so once the fire went out, and he's still alive, he hasn't even been touched by the flames. They went and they stabbed him to death with a knife. But he was, now, you say, is that true? Well, the historians have reported it and recorded it as being true, and so we don't know, but we know that Polycarp was real. We know that he was the bishop there at Smyrna. Now, just to give you an idea of Smyrna and or maybe Arianus was born in Smyrna, and he and Polycarp grew up as friends, childhood friends, and so Arianus knew him well. So he had a firsthand knowledge of him. And so that just, to me, lends a little bit more credence that what he reported is true. All right, one last thing. In 1948, archaeologists were excavating there in Smyrna, and they came across they call it, for some reason, a Greek home specimen. But basically what it was they unearthed a Greek home. This Greek home had a big courtyard in the front. It had 2 stories, built of marble, and had 5 bedrooms in it, such as what you would see in a gated neighborhood today. So these people, even back then, even back in ancient days, were so far beyond. They were so modern in their way of thinking, and very smart, very advanced people, okay? So just keep that in mind as we go about this. We're not talking about, I think that when we start talking about the 7 churches of Asia and we start going back in time, we think of these people as being peasants. We think of them as being people who, they didn't have anything to eat, they hardly had anywhere to live, and that's going to be the case, but not because of the place being poor. This was a well advanced place. It's possible that some of these people, some of these members, of the church at Smyrna, it's possible they were doctors. It's possible they were scientists. It's possible that they were people of a lot of influence, okay? So that's why I bring all these things up. They were much, I guess they would probably be common, like more so like what we are today, okay? You look around, none of us are dressed, we're not peasants. We're not really in need of a whole lot. Some of us, some of you have done a lot better than others. There's a lot of affluent people, but so they were a lot like us, So just keep that in mind as we go through this study and see what's going to happen to these people. These are people like you and I, and they were in a place that was more advanced than what you and I are in our day today, okay? Now, the city of Smyrna, it was located about 35 miles north of Ephesus. In fact, from the top of the Mount Pagus. Now, Mount Pagus was this huge mountain range that encircled all of Smyrna. And you could go online and Google Smyrna and look at pictures as they stand on the mountain. And from the top of that mountain, you could actually see what was called the Gate of Ephesus. It was this huge gate going into the city of Ephesus. So you can imagine how high up they were. It was a very old city, very beautiful city. Today it's called Izmir. It's in Turkey. It's the third largest city in Turkey. It's got a population of over 300,000 people. So it's still there. It's just got a name change. Now, Smyrna, I guess probably one of their downfalls was they were very patriotic to Rome. They built the first Roman temple in honor of Emperor Tiberius. They accepted the principle of Caesar worship, and each year the citizens would burn incense on this big altar to the Godhead of Caesar and say Caesar's Lord, and it was just a lot of influence, a lot of Roman influence in this place. Well, because the Christians at Smyrna refused to participate in this act, because they would not bow down to Caesar, and because they would not pay respects to him, they suffered tremendous persecution. So great, in fact, that over 5 million Christians were tortured and killed during the Smyrna church age. And that age spanned from AD 100 to about AD 312. Now, when I say tortured and killed, they were dismembered. The common practice of killing the men was to tie ropes under the arms to one horse, tie a rope around the waist to another horse, and slowly pull them apart. This all took place inside this huge stadium. They had great crowds that would gather in the Colosseums, and these Christians would be eaten by wild animals. I mean, this was just this was their football of the day. I mean, this was their sport. This was their entertainment. They enjoyed this stuff. I mean, they were bloodthirsty. Husbands were forced to watch their wives being repeatedly raped, and they're just beaten until they bled to death. They were forced to watch their children being tortured, and just many heinous things happened to them, mutilation and other things. These people couldn't fathom, once this persecution started, they couldn't fathom us meeting in a place like this. They couldn't fathom us having lights to look over the Word of God with, because so much was going on, so much torture and so much devastation was going on in their lives. So much so that they met in caves. They dug out pits underneath the earth and the ground, and if they were fortunate enough, they might find an old abandoned building to meet in. I mean, they had it tough. They ate together as a church. They prayed together as a church. They studied together as a church. They depended on each other, and they couldn't afford to break fellowship with one another. They had to stay together. Together was their only mode of survival whatsoever. And still, this whole time that all this is going on, the whole time that they would have to have people standing watch at night while others tried to sleep, the Word of God was going forth, and multitudes across the world, from out from Smyrna, were being saved in spite of all this death and devastation that's going on around them. That just goes to show you the power of the Word of God. Now, any questions so far? Any comments? All right. Now, also understand this about Smyrna. You remember last week I told you that Thyatira was not far from Ephesus and was a high commerce city, being the home of the trade guilds and the unions. Well, these trade guilds and these unions had also spread into the city of Smyrna. However, unlike Thyatira, Christians were not allowed to work for the labor unions and these guilds that were widespread and so many, because in order to obtain a decent job, you'd have to bow down to the altar of Caesar. So they couldn't work for these people. If you worked for these people, you would have to bow down many times a day. They would have different intervals, different times throughout the day that you would have to bow, and you'd have to give homage to Caesar. Well, the people here at Smyrna, they weren't about to do that. But by the way, what religion does that sound like today? Islam. So for this reason, Christians at Smyrna had to make a decision every day. Either they were going to uphold their faith and not forsake Jesus and starve or worse, or they were going to deny their faith and be fed from Caesar's table. I mean, it was a decision every day whether they were going to live or die, whether they were going to provide for their family or watch their family starve to death. So it's not out of the scope of possibility, folks, that America's churches might someday be forced to make the same decision. I mean, we're no better than Smyrna. We're no better than some of these other churches we're going to see. I don't believe this happens to us before the rapture for many reasons. I don't believe it's going to happen to us just because I like to feel that it's not. But when you go in and you start studying Revelation, you start studying the time that the rapture is going to take place, the timelines to the end of days, you're going to find that as long as we support Israel, as long as we are holding up Israel, as long as we're part of that Abrahamic covenant, I'll bless those who bless thee and I'll curse those who curse thee. As long as we're part of that, as long as we're standing behind Israel, then we will probably never see the things that Smyrna saw. And furthermore, our support of Israel is what keeps China from attacking Israel. It's what keeps Iran, Syria, China, Africa, all these Arab nations, all these enemies that are surrounding Israel. We're the only thing that keeps all of them from collapsing in on Israel and trying to destroy her. Now, let me say this while we're on this topic. There is a chance that America will loosen its support for Israel, I guess, to the point that maybe one day we'll turn our back on her. Maybe while Russia and its leader, Gog and Magog, there's some debate as to whether or not that happens before the rapture takes place. You go over to Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, you see that Gog and Magog, which is the prince of Rosh, which is commonly known as Russia today, the prince and Russia are going to come against Israel at some time, and we don't know if that's going to come before the rapture of the church. We know that Antichrist is going to step up and he's going to destroy that military move against Israel. That's going to give Israel confidence in them. That's going to make Israel trust them. That's what's going to lead to Daniel 9:27 when they signed the Abrahamic covenant with Israel. Or not the Abrahamic covenant, but the worldwide or the Arab peace treaty with Israel, the 7-year peace treaty, which is going to initiate the beginning of the 7-year tribulation period. We don't know if that's going to happen before or possibly after. And it really, to me, it really doesn't matter, but I do know this. I do know that America is going to fall. When the rapture takes place, we're going to fall. This country is going to collapse in on itself. Hopefully there's, out of 330 million people in our country, or 360 million, whatever the number is, hopefully there's at least 40% of that is truly saved. And so when you have that many people, millions of people, just disappear, vanish from the earth, America's going to collapse. And I believe with all my heart that that collapse is what's going to bring these countries against Israel, and that's when Antichrist is going to stand up, going to tell Israel, we got this for you, and they'll sign a treaty with them. So I don't believe that things are going to get that bad here to the point that we're going to have to bow down to a Caesar in order to eat. But we can't fool ourselves into thinking that things are not going to get worse, because they are. I mean, how's that for some encouragement tonight? They're going to get worse, and we have to be prepared. We have to be prepared as individuals. We have to be prepared as families, and we have to be prepared as a church to when these things befall us. Who would have thought in December that we would have had to basically shut church down in March? Never seen that before in our lives, any of us. So we don't know what may come about in the future. It's just going to be important that we're ready for whatever it is. Now, I want you to notice something interesting about this letter to Smyrna. Well, let me say this first. The letters to Smyrna and Philadelphia are the only two letters where Jesus gives only commendations and no condemnations. He doesn't condemn Smyrna at all. He doesn't condemn the church at Philadelphia at all. Also, these two letters are the only two letters that give us an obvious break or a division between what is happening in the time the letter was wrote and what will happen in the future in that church age, in that dispensation. Now, later on, we'll see that the letter of Philadelphia speaks of peace and victory and love and fellowship being experienced there at the church during the time that the letter was sent to them. And then it begins to prophesy. Then it begins to talk about the rapture of the church. It begins to go into the millennium and the New Jerusalem and the beginning of the new eternity. The letter to Smyrna, on the other hand, speaks of the persecution that's being suffered right then, and then speaks of a future persecution and bloodshed that will take place later on in that same dispensation, and to a certain degree in all churches when Jesus calls us out in the rapture, as we'll see you'll see it we see it today in Red China, we see it in India, Albania, Africa, Turkey. By the way, the people in Izmir, the people in the old Smyrna are worshiping underground today. They're still worshiping underground today because the government of Turkey will kill them if they find out who they are, if they find out they're worshiping Jesus. So kind of gives you an idea. We think we're far removed from right here in Revelation chapter 2 in Smyrna, but we're really not. All right, anything before we move on? Clear as mud? All right, let's look at the divisions. Division 1 of this Smyrna age is the present persecution. What was going on at the time the letter was written to them? Jesus says in verse 9, I know your works, your tribulation and poverty, but you are rich, and I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews. Now, make your little note there. The Jews here are actual followers of Judaism, okay? These are actual followers of Judaism, the religion Judaism. And it says, blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. The synagogue here is a place of religious dwelling, okay? Place of religious dwelling. So let's put it together. These Jews, they say they're Jews and are not. They're not followers of Judaism. They don't even know what Judaism is. They're a lot like the Pharisees and the scribes, okay? So these Jews are a religious dwelling place of Satan. That's what it's saying. You notice there I told you a while ago, look at that, but are a synagogue. Doesn't say, but are of the synagogue, but they are a synagogue. So they are a religious dwelling place. They say they're of Judaism, but they're not. What they are is a religious dwelling place of Satan. That's hard words right there. That's pretty serious stuff. When you can say that somebody is of Satan, you can say they worship Satan, but when you say that person is a religious dwelling place of Satan, that takes that takes it to a whole nother level. And that's how evil these people were. So Jesus is saying that what is going on at the time the letter was written was that there were those in the church who professed to be these followers of God, but they were literally a group of people whom Satan dwelled in.
Would you say they're more like Jews as in like the race Jews?
Yes.
And not religious?
Yes.
Like,
Yes. They were Israeli, if you will. They were of that ethnicity, but they were not of Judaism. And that's basically what a Jew is, a follower of Judaism.
But they said they were.
Mm-hmm. They said they were. They said they were followers of God. And here's the thing, and you probably caught this. They say they're a follower of Judaism, but Judaism is the thing that the Lord saved the Jews out of. I mean, that's what his sacrifice, that's what his blood was for. Judaism follows after the law. And so I'm wondering, why would they even entertain bringing these people into the fold if they were saying, hey, we are followers of Judaism? It makes no sense. But then again, you'll see that a lot of this starts taking place, especially next week, week after next. We got the community first Wednesday next week. But the week after, when we look at Pergamos, you're going to see that a lot of this stuff starts taking place. A lot of people are making it into the church body that do not know Christ. So these people are actually a dwelling place of Satan. They got into church because they claimed to be of God, but once they got in, they disrupted the church. They tried to stop it from going forward any way they could. They were having battles. They were butting heads with Polycarp. Polycarp was not listening to them. I think he probably saw them for what they were. They were trying to stop him. They were trying to get him cast out. He wouldn't do it. And so they began to go to the outside the church, to the officials, to the government, and that's how they finally had him killed. That's why he went to the stake to burn, and then eventually was stabbed to death. And the sad part is, these people probably didn't even realize who they were working for. They were there simply, in my opinion, they were there simply just to carry out their own agendas and their own ambitions. And possibly, well, we know that their reasons for being there were no good. I mean, why would you want to be a part of something that people are trying to kill? Why would you want to be a part of a body that people are trying to chase you down and kill you, dismember you, and delimb you, and just horrendous things to you? I mean, why would you want to be a part of that? So we know that they had to be just evil workers of Satan, spies, if you will, put into the church. All right. Now, anything before we move on? All right. So it would be unwise for us not to understand and realize today that Satan still is employing the same tactics. He's still doing the same thing in our churches. He's still sending spies into the Lord's churches to disrupt and stop their progress at any cost. I'm not talking about your common disagreements. I'm not talking about, you and I disagree on something that we want to do with the church. But you can tell when you know Satan really sent that person, David, you can tell, can't you? It's a totally different, you sense it. You feel it, and you know it. And what's so bad and what's so crazy about it is you feel like you're the only one who knows it. And because they're able to draw people into them, but you see it and you know it, and you have to stand against them, which makes you look like the enemy because you're standing against them when they've built support around them. It's a tough place to be in. It's a tough thing to have to endure as a pastor. And here's the thing: whenever you see a church that's split, that didn't happen because its members were following Christ. It ain't why they split. Okay? Now, it might have been because some of them there, half of them there might have been, But Satan's looking to get in any way he can. He's looking to get in a church, and he's looking to rip it apart. And for right now, he's not so much attacking from the outside of the church, although he will, speaking of, government entities. But right now, he's attacking churches from the inside. I mean, he's doing he's having too great a success on the inside right now to even have to worry about the outside. Now, let's notice the second division in verse 10. Jesus changes his focus here from the present to the future, and he begins to prophesy about future events that's going to take place during this Smyrna dispensation, okay? In verse 10, he says, "Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life." Now, here in this second division, God is prophesying that Satan is about to begin starting the attack from outside the churches. So the first division, what was going on when the letter actually got to them, they are being attacked from the inside. They're being attacked by these people who call themselves Jews, followers of Judaism, but were not. They were they were demon possessed. Jesus says here, he says, saints will be thrown into jail. Why? Because they broke the laws of authority put in place by the government. They're not going to jail because they stole stuff. They're going to jail because Satan's now attacking from the outside. He's now turning the government onto them, and they're going to be going to jail, and they're going to be setting up laws. And these people at Smyrna, these Christians, they're going to be breaking these laws. He says they'll be tried. By whom? The government. And he says that persecution will last for 10 days. Now, what are these 10 days? Anybody know? Let me first say that they have been fulfilled, just like Jesus said they would. But here they are. I got them on the screen for you. 10 days represent the 10 different periods of persecution under 10 different Roman emperors. Okay? So the first emperor was Nero. The second one was Domitian. The third one was Trajan. The fourth one, Pius. The fifth one, Marcus Aurelius. The sixth one, Severus. The seventh one, Thocian. The eighth one, Decius. The ninth one, Valerian. And the 10th one, and by far the worst one of them all, was Diocletian. He hunted Christians down in caves and in the deep forest and persecuted them and killed them for 10 years. His reign alone lasted 10 years. Now, we know that Christ's prophecy has been fulfilled by these government heads, but we have to keep in mind that this letter is not written concerning one period of the Smyrna dispensation, but two periods, okay? First period represented by Satan attacking inside the church, verse 9. So let's get this. Second period represented by Satan attacking the church from the outside, verse 10. And if these 7 letters here are also prophetical of the signs of the end times, which they are, then this letter must represent 2 periods during the last days, or the end times, the days that we're possibly in right now. One division represented by Satan attacking the church from the inside. The other one, Satan attacking the church from the outside. Now, we've all been in church, probably most of us, all of our lives. And probably for all of our lives, we've seen disputes rise up in church. We've seen some of the most horrific things that we've ever experienced in church. It's just something about when church people come against one another. It's ugly, okay? So we've seen that, but we haven't seen it to the degree that we've seen it over the last 10 years. I guess as pastors, we kind of look around and we watch what's going on, and we hear from other pastors and we talk to other pastors. But folks, over the last 10 years, when I first got into ministry in 98, I didn't hear so much about all this stuff. But as I got further on into my ministry, all of a sudden I'm seeing, I'm learning and meeting more pastors and different pastors from all over different places. And this stuff is so prevalent today. It's happening so much today. Satan attacking from the inside. But this church, what Jesus is telling us here is that when he comes, there's going to be attacks going on that are going to be coming from the outside. There's going to be attacks coming in from government heads. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be happening here, but let's remind ourselves that this revelation is not about America. It's about all of God's people. And so as we look around at different places in our world, we're seeing these things already taking place. We're seeing Satan lining up his forces in the Philippines, in China, all over the Middle East, Africa, Turkey. These Christians are being hunted down and killed by government authorities. I mean, to the point that they actually have to go underground in order to meet. You say, well, that's a terrible thing. And it is a terrible thing. It's a terrible. We've got the missionaries. What's their names that are going to be coming here? Yes. They can't even have their photos taken. Is that the ones from China? They can't even have their photos taken here in the States. I mean, when they come, we can't even video this for fear that it will get back to China. And they could, I mean, I don't even go into what could happen to them. But that stuff is going on around the world, and we say, well, you know, that's bad, but we're so far removed from it, it's not really affecting us. But it's against the law and to go from house to house spreading the gospel in parts of California and Massachusetts and up and down the eastern seaboard. There's laws against it. There's laws that prohibit people from going and handing tracts out, knocking on doors and just handing the tract out. I mean, it's been here for a while, folks. It's been here for a while. So, because we don't see as much of it, because we're in the Bible Belt, it's already starting to happen right here. There is a law in the books in 30 states in our country called unlawful assembly that forbids people to meet, even in their houses, without a permit for worship services. 30 states. Here in America, that you can't meet in your house in a religious worship service without a permit. The state of Massachusetts again. I mean, they've put people, they're putting people in jail all the time for just going out and spreading the gospel. Now, I believe before Jesus comes back to get us, that there's going to be more laws passed. We're going to see laws passed by governments right here in America. We know we're seeing it happen across the world, but we're going to see it more right here in America. Will it get real bad in the U.S.? Maybe not as bad as it's going to get in other countries, simply because of that Abrahamic covenant that we're in, where God promises us that if we'll bless Israel, He'll bless us. Now, right now, like I said earlier, we're a defender of Israel. If we ever see the time that we cease to be a defender of Israel, I believe it will be worse in America. I believe we will see what other countries are seeing in the world. We'll see it right here. But even now, we're starting to see Satan work in our government to attack our churches. Listen, who knows who sent the pandemic? We don't know if God sent COVID to awaken us, to get us out, and to be more his hands and feet, or we don't know if this is something from the pits of hell that Satan has sent forward. But whoever sent it, God's reason, God's purpose was to get us out, to spread us out, to start working harder than what we've ever done before, put more effort into getting the gospel out more so than we've ever done before. Satan saw this as an opportunity too. And he began to work in places, in states, even here, not so much here, but in states all around our country, and was forbidding churches to open, pastors going to jail. I mean, so we know that this thing's been taken advantage of and that's all about Satan. So we're starting to see these things happen here. Now, the point I want you to see is this: God's word is unfolding right before our very eyes. All 7 dispensations of the church age are being fulfilled to their entirety. Even Smyrna, with 2 different divisions, has and is being fulfilled. So let's go back to Ephesus last week. So Ephesus had fallen out of love with Christ, okay? So they were going through the motions. They were coming to church. They were laboring. They were probably working hard to do things the right way. They were putting forth a lot of effort, but they had no Jesus left in them. They weren't doing it for his cause. They were doing it for their own cause. And so we take Ephesus, and the Lord saying, okay, this church this is what's going on in this dispensation of time, and it lasted through this dispensation of time, this span of time, okay, but that same thing is going to be going on when I return, okay? And so we see that when Christ comes back to get us, Ephesus is prophetic of what the church, some of the church, not all the church, but what a lot of the church is going to be going through or doing when Christ comes. Smyrna, the Bible says that there's going to be 2 things going on when the Lord returns. There's going to be that first division where the church is being attacked from the inside by people who were a religious dwelling place of Satan. In other words, religion is going to be attacking the church from the inside. And then there's going to be another division to where the church is going to be attacked from the outside, government forces coming in. And those 2 things will be happening when the Lord comes back to get us. Let's just pray that it's not happening here. Amen. Any questions? Am I just that good? Yeah, I'm through, Donnie. Where you been? Oh, I forgot to wake you up. Yeah. Yeah, it represents from the time Jesus started the church until the time he comes back for it. Yes. And next week you'll begin to see how Satan began to work through these religious people, such as these, not necessarily these people who call themselves Jews, but how he's going to start working through Constantine. And Constantine, Constantine's in battle. He wants to be the Roman emperor. And so he's in battle for that title, and he's in physical military battle. And so he's been stomping out the Christians. He's been killing them. And then you'll see next week he has this dream, and in this dream he sees a cross burning, and he says that was that God spoke to him, and he's going to pass what's called the Edict of Toleration, which gave just freedom to all Christians, so that all Christians would come and would join the church there, and they'd give them, silver and gold, and put a ring on their finger, and give them robes, and elevate them in the sight of everybody. And didn't have to be saved to be there. Just everybody come. And so it gets progressively worse after that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. That's pretty cool. I've never done that. Show it to me before you leave. You drew it in there? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. You know, and we'll get to that Laodicean church, and that one's probably the most heartbreaking one of all the seven. And one thing too, I think someone asked a question, or someone said last week that they thought that it was went to Ephesus first and then Smyrna and so forth and so on because it was the normal trade route, and it was. But I got to looking, and Laodicea is about the same distance as Ephesus. They could have very well gone to Laodicea first and come around this way, but they didn't because Ephesus was the first church of the first dispensation, and Laodicea. Hmm. That's interesting. And these seven churches are so fascinating to me because the, the Lord, it's in the way that the Lord used them because in the first, I mean, the first church on that trade route represents that first span of time, and then so forth and so on. And each one represents the time in which the letter was sent to them. That's what was going on in the time the letter was sent. But they also prophesy of what's going to be taking place. So there's going to be seven different things taking place in the world when Jesus comes back for the church, as represented by all three of these. The seventh being the absolute worst of all. Um, that's pretty good. I'm gonna see you a picture before you leave. Anything else? Well, I'm gonna just tell myself I did such a great job explaining it that there were no questions. I look at the wins, not the losses. All right. Are there any prayer requests? I've got the prayer sheet up here.
I came in late. Somebody else.
Mm-mm.